So after a week of being on the air nonstop, I was going crazy. So we developed some schedules, and I would go on at night, and the air would be at house, but I couldn't do anything. So I went out and I visited different towns. So I basically, I would say I visited about 60 towns, giving aid and basically reporting on what I was seeing. And then I saw that our function changed in terms of providing aid or basically connecting families or avoiding people to commit suicide, because people would call us at the station saying that they were going to kill themselves, and we had to convince them not to do it. And I asked for people to help, and psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors, they would come to the station to basically work as volunteers. And after that week, I found out that we had to change our focus to focus basically on denouncing what the government and the authorities were not doing. So that's when the problem started with the government, because I started asking the questions and they were not happy. So, and the rest is part of the history. I'm almost finishing a book on that experience. But anyway, the thing is that throughout the entire time that I spent there, I went the very next morning after the hurricane. I don't know how I did it, believe it, because the roads, and it was still raining. I stayed there until January, after the Los Reyes, El Día de los Reyes, January, basically every single day. And some of the stations went on the air, back on the air, about, I would say, 2 weeks afterwards, or almost a month, some of them a month afterwards. Some of the TV stations went out. Channel 4, for instance, Guapa Television lost their tower, their antenna. A lot of stations lost their tower, and we were gonna see a shift on the way the media will work. And since then, now, you know, slowly but surely, the companies are starting to rebuild. But what has happened, in my opinion, is that we need to have a better understanding on how the media is portraying and what is being said to the public and what is not. I found out that at the beginning of the broadcast, I received many calls from people from the diaspora, really concerned about Puerto Rico, and it was easier for them to call in than for us to communicate within the island. So I think the diaspora must, and that would be a recommendation for the center, and that diaspora should start promoting any sort of connection with the local entities that are making the news in Puerto Rico. You have to know the people that are on the air and on the media, and but not only on the island-wide status, but also in terms of regional coverage, because some of the regional, particularly regional stations, radio stations in the West Coast, those kept on they were not affected by the hurricane, so some of them were on the air. So you have to, that would be one of the recommendations. The second one, because also, and I said, let me say this in Spanish, it would be a matter of life or death, porque en una emergencia, the only thing that was available was the radio. Forget about social media, forget about the internet, or forget about the newspapers. None of them were working. So the radio, we had to go back to basics and go back to a radio without any power, without any electricity, working on a generator. And we have to focus that sort of communications within the island, the communities, and outside of Puerto Rico. Also, yesterday, the head of the security, Pesquera, said in Puerto Rico in a press conference that after the hurricane, after doing an assessment of everything that happened, he said that the government should not allow to have another collapse of the telecommunications and the media. So I think that's an area of opportunity for the diaspora to develop or to look into opportunities, business opportunities in that area as well. And also, perhaps the possibility of creating a Centro de Mando de Telecomunicaciones, that's what the name that I put, like a telecommunications telecommunications and media command center. That would be something important for the media, because for the diaspora, because when that happened, that's in terms of the local within the island Puerto Rican media and reporters. I would say that right after the hurricane, a lot of reporters that were staying in Puerto Rico covering the economic crisis, reporters from mainline media and also from media from around the world who were covering the collapse of the economy, they stayed and they covered what was happening after the hurricane. And then a lot of people came. And I would say a better reporting and journalism reporting was being done by the media from the States, because they, and not by us, because we had not, déjame decirlo en español, no había medios de comunicación en Puerto Rico para trabajar. ¿Ves? Era más fácil con los medios de Estados Unidos. Entonces, in that sense, I think the Centro must focus on keeping Puerto Rico in the narrative of the stateside media, whether it's promoting whatever they're doing now, whether it's keeping the story of Puerto Rico alive, because that's the only way it would put the focus on the island and helping us rebuild whatever we have by saying and by showcasing what is really going on. But in order to do that, I will say that you have to have established ties with the local reporters and local media owners of the tiny little stations and tiny little newspapers, other than the big ones on San Juan. I would say that would be the initial remarks. Tengo tiempo.
Vamos a volver.
Okay.
Volvemos.
Dale, perdóname.
We have the advantage of, well, disadvantage of not having Marlena Fitzpatrick with us. She's not doing well and could not join us today. So we send her our prayers for recovery promptly, and that we will learn from her in some other one of these occasions. We will have time, her time, to continue your presentations, because there's a lot more that I know you have experience with, and I'm going to ask you about that. And I'm going to have Harry present something now. For my point of view, and I'm just going to have a rejoinder connected to what you said, please, in the program, scratch where it says under my name, Kent, Ohio. Leverhulme professorship at Leeds has nothing to do with Kent, Ohio. That's where I was prior to going to some other place, and then I went to Leeds in the United Kingdom, where I am now. Now, before that, one of my areas of research was specifically emergency communication research for Latino non-English speaking populations in the United States. And I have a study about that if you want to find out about it. It's called I forgot the title just now, but it's because I did it in 2010, so it's 8 years ago. It's the Achilles heel of emergency communications. It's awful how, and I'm going to give you this scenario because it connects with what you were saying. So if we're concerned about what's happening in Puerto Rico, that they lost their stations, think about the following. Where in the United States are there Spanish language radio stations that have news departments en español? Departamentos de noticias, personal de noticias en español. En las emisoras de radio en Estados Unidos. Which ones? Do you know of any that have local news staff operating, providing news on a daily basis about what's happening?
I don't know anymore now. There used to be.
It used to be before the corporatization of these media. So when I did my study in 2010 in Texas, of all the radio stations in Central Texas, from San Antonio to North Austin, not a single one had any news people. So if there was an emergency, they could cover it if the emergency happened from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. Because they would put their salesperson, mira, ven acá tú, saca esa noticia, ya lo que sea. So we have a similar situation if there were hurricanes in many other places, or there are earthquakes, fires, whatever it is in the United States. So I just want to, I'm going to come back to that later if there's interest in my talking a little bit more about that, because there is crisis in Puerto Rico, but there could be, and there have been, I know that for experience and from my research, the crisis of emergency communications for non-English speaking populations in the United States. And by the way, my very first study in that was in 1988. in '89 when I had a grant from the California Policy Center. And anybody remember the October 17th, 1989? What happened that infamous day when there was a World Series up in Oakland?
Earthquake.
There was an earthquake. That afternoon, just 2 hours before, my team and I had gone to the governor's office of emergency services to ask them what preparations did they have for communicating with non-English speaking populations in California if there were such a major disaster. And the answer was, oh, we don't have that much. And 2 hours later, we were flying back to Santa Barbara, where I was based, when the earthquake hit, and there's a policy seminar, there's a policy report on that. The crisis is still the same, and the situation is still the same for California as it is for Texas, as it would be for Louisiana, for Connecticut, for Florida. So this is just a rejoinder that the crisis that we have in Puerto Rico is just one example of many things. And then there are social media that are taking the place for people to communicate and know what's going on. And for that, we turn to her.
Thank you, Federico. I'm just a historian who's doing way too many things, including a little bit of media. Actually, what Sandra says resonates with me a lot, because last year, when we came here to address the Puerto Rico post-Maria, a few weeks after Maria, actually what I spoke about was about the inability of Puerto Ricans to communicate with each other, town from town, even a barrio from another barrio. People were actually communicated, right? And I started getting, I started to try to track my relatives and friends by using Zillow, the Zillow app, right? And through that, I could get a lot of information. That's what I spoke about last time we were here, right? And to actually compile information, and I was able to get 2 or 3 sources to confirm things that were happening or not. I started posting it in a page that was one of the first pages created on Facebook. I think it was Mayagüez Maria, then Añasco Maria, so people could get in touch, and also receiving the calls from, let's say, people from Luquillo calling because they had a landline that somehow was still working. Could you tell me what's going on in the island? I cannot leave my urbanization. It was that kind of crisis. So what Sandra says completely resonates with what's my experience trying to locate my friends and relatives, and in the process helping strangers, right? So this time I actually wanted to make a few points. I want to do something different. There's a few points. Sorry, I got allergies, so I don't cough. I'm eating this. So there's a few points that I want to highlight about the role of social media and what we can all do for rebuilding Puerto Rico post-Maria, right? First of all, I think that if we are to contribute to rebuilding Puerto Rico, we need to understand that Puerto Rico problems, they precede Maria. We all know that there are many crises that have been castigating the island for the best part of this young century, since at least 2006. Moreover, these many crises, which were no doubt aggravated by Maria, are rooted on socioeconomic and political unresolved issues in Puerto Rico. And we know that. And a lot of people are passionate about them, right? But we have to take things one step at a time. So we have to think about solutions that address immediate needs, such as housing, education, and food insecurity, as well as reconstruction. But we also need to look beyond the state of emergency and plan for the mid and for the long run. So we need strategies that are self-sustainable, an economy that is not dependent on fossil fuels, green energies. We need water security, which after Maria, it was exposed that Puerto Rico has no water security, and we cannot exist without water. It's just, it doesn't get simpler than that, right? 3 days without water, you're dead. It's that simple. We're water, right? So what is the role of the traditional and social media in all of this? It's about dispersing information. And it sounds simple, right? It's about making the information available. It's about education, awareness, creating a political consciousness, right? So going back to when this crisis started, I mean, I was reading media in Puerto Rico. Everything was about the crisis and what is going to happen, but mainstream media over here, nothing was happening, or even social media. Meanwhile, you got what was the name of the former mayor here, who now has like a news media? Bloomberg News started to publish a series of articles in which they were proposing this horrible austerity measure. We're not basing any kind of Puerto Rican reality. They were just a one size fits all, and I'm seeing it, and people are passing it forward on Facebook, tweeting them like, no, this is crazy, don't pass this crap around, right? So since no one was writing, I started writing about that, about, kind of sometimes ridiculing, even started doing my own blog and HuffPost, Latino Rebel, things like that, because there was a dearth of information or analysis regarding what was going on in Puerto Rico. It had not hit the American public yet, right? So, like I mentioned, I started to write op-eds and write for academic forums about the fiscal, economic, health migration, and the health crisis and the humanitarian crisis, because Puerto Rico was at the brink of a humanitarian crisis, right? And also about the austerity measures, right, that were being recommended by the usual suspects. Now, since that point, actually, since that very moment, even though I wasn't a journalist, I was just expressing my opinion, but also I'm a historian. I'm data-driven and I'm fact-driven. It's like, if your facts are not with you, the story you're telling must be a lie. That's how I see it, right? So I made sure that I would check my fact many times. And if I made a mistake, I would go and correct the blog, Federata, and all these things that people don't care about anymore. So also I tried not to hyperbolize. Even when I was using sarcasm and satire, right? Or if I was going to hyperbolize to make a point, I would make it like so ridiculous that people will know, no, he's being sarcastic, right? It's being him. So why I'm saying this, fake news, that word, fake news, right? If we use them, if we don't recognize them, if we pass them forward, what we do is that we discredit and we undermine what we're trying to do, which in my case, or this case, is to expose years of colonial relations and bad public policy at the local level, which are at the core of Puerto Rico's problem, right? We know that, and I understand that, right? So
What did you say the core? I'm sorry.
that I said that the cores are years of colonialism and bad public policy at the most local of levels, right? So in essence, I'm not blaming Puerto Ricans. I'm saying it's the whole colonial relationship and the whole political Puerto Rican elite from the most local level, right? Because we do take decisions that are bad decisions, like insisting on fossil fuels, opposing green energies, right? Those kind of things. But and I don't want, let me retrace this. I understand that, right? But then again, I'm looking at this problem as the state of emergency, resolve those problems, then mid-range, and then long range. Long range, to me, is the colonial status, right? Long range. Because solving the colonial status is not going to happen overnight. And the needs of the Puerto Ricans come first, right? So, and going back to what I was trying to say, it's like we need to be really good at discerning when we're being fed lies. So would it surprise you that a few months ago, Gallup released a study with the following findings? Only 32% of the American public say that media is careful to separate fact from opinion. 32% say that media is careful to separate fact from opinion. That was at least 58% in 1984. 45% see a great deal of political bias in news coverage. It was only 25% in 1989. And the majority of the American public cannot name a source that reports news objectively. right? And the press is there for a reason. The press is there to check on the government. It's a check and balance. If the press is not trusted, any politician can lie to you. We know that because we're in the United States of America, and the biggest lie in the world is the president. Yeah, I just said it. So fake news, they span across all kinds of media. They're printed, online articles, podcasts, YouTube videos, radio shows, even still images, right? The memes, right? Even the best researchers, they get to be fooled by them, right? And it has become my personal crusade that the movement to review Puerto Rico is without reproach. Why? Because going back to that colonial relationship, we are under the most severe scrutiny. That is why. I'm just gonna say a few things real quick so I can. So for that matter, I have criticized those who claim that what is going on in Puerto Rico is genocide or ethnic cleansing. Not only is demonstrable false, it's also insensitive to Native Americans, Africans, Armenians, Jews, Poles, Rwandan, Muslims in the former Yugoslavia. Actually, the US wanted to, at a certain point, for whatever reason, wanted to exterminate the Puerto Ricans. They're doing a really bad job because when the United States took control over Puerto Rico, there were about 900,000 Puerto Ricans, and now there's 9 million. So I say kind of backfire. So also, there is no plan to empty the island so it can be populated by Americans or quote unquote gringos. It goes completely against the political establishment that now dominates the United States and that fears that an influence of Puerto Rico is going to change the political landscape. It doesn't benefit them at all, right? So back to what we can do. We can use media outlets to really educate, disseminate trustworthy information and analysis, and to create awareness about Puerto Rico's plight, right? Because like I mentioned, this is the first reason I went into this. It's not like I was bored looking for something else to do, didn't want to write that book, it was too much of a pain, or maybe a little bit of that. But it just started with not finding news in the mainstream media in the US, or even in non-mainstream media about what was happening in Puerto Rico, unless it was to promote the idea that Puerto Ricans had crashed the economy, now wanted to be bailed out on the American taxpayers' dole. And that's the reason I went in, but with facts and information, not with propaganda or with pamphlets. That won't do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add something about?
Yes, yes,
just
yes. Go ahead.
two things.
We're gonna have a nice conversation about these issues now.
And there was an article in Noticel.com, a news site where I write my columns on Sundays, and there's a story on today's edition saying that data gathered by GitHub.com said that the percentage of sentences per day on online news sites such as Mashable, BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, and others, and the online versions of CNN, Fox News, Saturday Time, and others, there were less mentions of the Puerto Rican crisis as compared to Texas and Florida when that happened. And also, but the number changed on 2 dates, September the 26th, and when President Trump tweeted that talking about when he tweeted about bringing more aid to Puerto Rico, and then on October the 3rd, when Trump came to the island and threw the paper towels and all that. So you will remember that. And also those data coincide with they evaluated the amount of sentences mentioned in Puerto Rico during those days on TV networks. And that coincides with the analysis that the Washington Post said that the humanitarian crisis in Puerto Rico was not as important for the media in the mainland, and that it was the public that made it into a story because of the continuing interest. And I think the diaspora has to pay special attention to that in bringing out the issues of Puerto Rico to the States. And that was one point that I wanted to say. And the other one, I know that there's propaganda and saying something that you mentioned. there's fake news and there's propaganda. And particularly in Puerto Rico, we're suffering a lot of that because of they're basically pushing reporters out of the media to put in there former politicians, former convicts, and current legislator on the air, which is really, that's a problem that we have there. But the thing is that the truth is that there are some issues that are not being addressed. There is the fact that some particular areas of the island still don't have running water and don't have electricity and they don't have power, makes us think that it's a concerted effort either by the government, the state government, or by whomever, to make the people basically get out of there. There are some towns that at this moment people are not having, I mean, imagine you have to be without water and electricity for 1 day or a week, imagine 8 months. You will go crazy. And there are some areas in Puerto Rico that they're basically not providing any assistance. And people are starting to say that when you talk to the people in the communities. So that's probably where the rumor started. Okay.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Harry. I'm going to do a bit of a rejoinder and then quickly open it up for our discussion. One of the things that comes across from this discussion and from the Noticel article is that there is a need to have journalists know more and better about Puerto Rico. So one of the things that the Centro could and should do is have maybe some workshops where at least some journalists might be interested in covering Puerto Rico in a better way. And when we convene in Puerto Rico, and not necessarily just that day, have workshops for Puerto Rican journalists who can write better about what's happening in the diaspora and passing it on to the people of Puerto Rico, to our Puerto Ricanos back home, because there's such a big misconception about what is known about the diaspora, even in Puerto Rico. So I recommended that to Carlos, and I think we're going to have some session about that if they agree to support that. Another thing is that based on the El Centro has been gathering, and you may have heard Edwin talk about this morning, or Carlos, that El Centro has documented, has gathered all the news about Puerto Rico. And they have a huge database, which was used by these journalists of Centro de Periodismo Investigativo to write this story. But that's a news article, not necessarily a systematic analysis that it merits more analysis is what I'm saying. That data set is there, and I think that it should be a project of the Centro volunteers, students in Puerto Rico, who could use that for their master's thesis, for their term papers, for doctoral dissertations, about quiénes somos, cómo nos ven y cómo nos vemos, how they see us outside and how we see us inside of Puerto Rico. So that would be something to look forward to some analysis of how these things are taking place. And the one problem that we all have, that I had at some point in my life, but then as a student and then a professor of communication, I broke that pattern of saying the media are, but I use the media as a plural, never as a singular. Like someone's nodding back there, yes. The media are, not the media is, even though it's said normally, and I don't, people even.
It's a plural. It's a plural.
It's a plural. It's a plural. Just the same, data are, not data is, except when it's in Star Trek, because there's one data. Wait until his twin brother came along, and then there was the data as the plural. But that's a. I was.
Me too.
Well, you know what happens is that as years went by, my students had no idea what I was talking about when I said data. Okay. So enough of that. The point is that we can. One of the things that is indispensable for us in our immediate circles, and then in our classrooms or our family, or as a project of El Centro, is to help in news literacy, media literacy, so that it's, yes, there are biases out there in the media. If you select certain topics in Fox, there will be biases on certain topics, but not everything that, and I'm not a fan of Fox, but I know that not everything that they say is is biased. A lot is. Sinclair stations are biasing almost any news that they have about politics, yes. But let's separate the wheat from the chaff in these things as part of the effort to also educate people about who and what we are.
They report sports, right?
Huh?
The sports, they report them right.
Oh, okay, in sports, yeah, okay, good. There we go. So this is,
That's about it.
yeah. Anything that has to do with politics, we know that there's a
The weather,
Maybe, well, unless they're gonna blame it on Obama when there's a storm.
yeah.
Okay, so with that said, we have some current situations in the news media operations in Puerto Rico, the telecommunication problems, the infrastructure. It's problematic when they went to the digital and then they lost the analog, and the analog, as we've had conversations about this, the analog is what will work in the future, but are we prepared in other ways? Do we have the infrastructure to communicate, not just during emergencies, but what is relevant to our community for our development, our successes, not just the stereotypes in the entertainment media. So there is a need for more of this, and there is a need for more people to participate again in the research, in the documentation, in the training, in the media literacy. And I don't know how many of us can work with the infrastructure part. That we had the previous panel that had some people working on infrastructure issues. But this is all a complex problem that we hope that the Centro will, at a minimum, connect the people interested in these topics. I'm going to open up for questions and then rejoinders from you, then things that you wanted to add to your presentation, and I cut you short so that we could have a little bit more of interaction. And I'm going to start 1, 2, 3. That's the first order.
Okay. My name's David Medina. I'm a retired journalist. I was a mainstream media journalist, reporter, and editor for more than 40 years.
Whereabouts?
In New York,
With
in the Daily News, in Connecticut with the Hartford Courant, the Bergen Record, the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle, and the Miami News. And I also wrote a little bit for the San Juan Star. I wrote a column out of New York City in English for the San Juan Star. I just want to say, before I say anything else, that I am a big admirer of Sandra Rodriguez Cotto. I read her blog as often as I can, and she is the voice of reason. Okay, and I just want you to know that, and I have nothing but the utmost respect for your work.
Wow.
For the people who came in late, in Blanco y Negro con Sandra, she has a column, and now she has a radio program that you can tune into just through the internet. So in Blanco y Negro con Sandra, you can Google it, you'll find it. And she has a book on the same topic, which is a compendium of her columns. And again, for those who came in late, she is my co-author in a book on the media of Puerto Rico, because from my point of view, there's not even a single professor in Puerto Rico who knows more about the current media situation than she does. So that's, go ahead. You had a question?
Okay, my question is a question, and I want to know if you agree. You mentioned about the perception that the agenda in the United States is basically to empty the island of Puerto Ricans. Mm-hmm. And you made it sound like it's just a theory. But when given the fact that you have a financial control board whose only objective, whose only purpose is to pay back the bondholders, and the only method they have for paying back the bondholders is through austerity, through eliminating everything everything Puerto Rican, the university, the schools, the hospitals, the roads, all the infrastructure,
the culture.
The culture, yes, the culture, absolutely. How can you say that that's not the purpose when all the support systems are being sold off?
I'm saying that it's hard. What I was trying to say is that it's hard to state it as a fact. Mm-hmm. But you have some indications that might be. And
yes, I mean, just as an example. One of the things that the Promesa law required was that there be some kind of economic development program for Puerto Rico. That does not exist. The only thing that they have on paper that they're counting on to boost the economy is the $30 billion that the federal government is sending for hurricane relief. So in other words, the hurricane relief money is going to go back to Wall Street.
No, they're also.
It's going to go back to pay them down
Last week, they
bondholders.
just announced los PPP, la Alianza Pública, public partnership, public-private partnerships, and they
Public-private partnership.
announced a couple of energy-related projects that were basically that the government didn't like after two administrations before. So they were, because there were some concerns about the issues that environmental issues that they were included on their proposals, and now the board is saying that they are going forward with those projects. So
How do you, go ahead.
I want to say something. This whole thing about a plan to empty Puerto Ricans, it doesn't work for the conspiracy. First of all, it has to be like so incredibly big that it would never work. And let's forget about the Republican not wanting Puerto Rican here, right? The Republican establishment. But let's say this: austerity measures are about redirecting federal monies that should go into the infrastructure of Puerto Rico, running the government in Puerto Rico to pay the debt, right? That's not money. That is called tax revenue, right? So no one who wants Puerto Rico to pay the debt wants Puerto Ricans to leave the island, because once Puerto Ricans start leaving the island, the tax base in Puerto Rico gets reduced. And once you leave Puerto Rico, you don't have to pay taxes to the government of Puerto Rico. So that any economy will say, no, we want Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico so they pay taxes to the state of Puerto Rico so the debt is paid.
but the truth is, by the end of May, you're gonna see a lot of people going out, because people were waiting, parents particularly, were waiting to see what happened during the end of the semester.
Right.
And now with the announcement that the schools are gonna be closed, and the things that people are doing at the schools, I was just tweeting this morning about this school, the Julia de Burgos School in Carolina, that was given to a Pastor Otoniel fund for $1 a month by the government, and he painted over a historical mural painted by Rodriguez Martino, and they just basically don't want to say what they're going to do to clean it. So people are really upset. A lot of people are moving by the end of this semester.
But let's make a difference. Let's make a difference here.
I'm not
in
saying
terms-
that it's
No,
not a
but let's
conspiracy,
make a
but-
difference. Let's precisely dissect this. One thing is to have a conspiracy, which would be quite difficult
Yeah.
to go through.
Yeah,
Another thing is to have a series of policies that empty certain areas of the island that are beneficial for certain entrepreneurs.
Yes,
That's a
exactly.
different, this is a nuanced statement.
Well, it's a nuanced statement, but it
But the
basically,
outcome is-
but the effect of it will be that you will have only very rich and very poor people. If it's played out to its logical conclusion, you will only have very poor and very rich people on the island.
It's gonna be left.
That's what's going to be left. Now, I have another question about media. And like I said, I think I have a little bit of experience in it. I noticed that the mainstream media in the United States, when it came to the hurricane, they poured themselves out coverage because it was a humanitarian issue. When it comes to the debt crisis itself and the things that we're just talking about right now, it's like it didn't happen. Even it's covered in such a superficial way that it makes it look almost legitimate, that it makes what's happening down there acceptable. And the only place that you find real coverage of what's going on is by reading the media in Puerto Rico. There's a huge disconnect between the crisis as it's covered in Puerto Rico and as it's covered in the United States, except for maybe non-mainstream publications like Intercept, like Vox. They really get to the heart of things. But you go to the large mainstream newspapers, even that Frontline piece, that was I thought they were really going to get to them because Frontline is known for that. And they glossed it over. They just dealt with the immediate crisis of the hurricane aftermath, which everybody's already gotten over, and they're covering it like it just happened yesterday. And I was wondering if you agree with that.
Well, I would say that in terms of you're talking about the economy, right? The
Mhm.
crisis. It has lasted for almost the last part for almost 3 years. So there has been a lot of media coverage from the state side during that time. And I think I would say that I was expecting more media coverage combining the fiscal situation with the crisis after the hurricane.
Mhm.
But I wouldn't say that they have. I
No, they
seen
haven't.
anything,
No, I agree.
because
They
I have
haven't-
seen
They
it.
haven't done it at all, no.
But
You're
I
right.
have seen a lot of media coverage covering the
It would be
crisis.
fascinating to have an analysis of the characteristics of what's been covered. Check the Noticel article and the Centro de Periodismo Investigativo article, because it will be very telling. I've only read the headlines in Noticel, but I'm eager to read the study to see the methodology and then the specific outcomes. You're next, and then you're next.
Hello, my name is Richard Guerra. I'm actually not Puerto Rican, I'm Cuban. So my question is, what type of media do you trust, and what is your favorite person on that type of media? Lately, I've been following a lot on Soledad O'Brien, actually. I feel like she's one of the most unbiased people I know. Thoughts?
Which one? I'm sorry.
Soledad O'Brien.
Soledad O'Brien.
She's Afro-Cuban, yep.
No.
Ari?
I watch CNN. I think it's right down the middle. It's trustworthy. I also see Vice and this see a lot of video from Vice, right? But it's it depends. They could really hit on the nail, have like a lot of facts wrong. So it's young kids. I will say it's young adults producing videos, mostly on their commission. So I think CNN, it's great, right? But I honestly, what I do, I mostly read New York Times, even the Washington Post. You have to read across. We have a problem with media. I would say the biggest problem with media is that conservative media took a turn which facts don't matter anymore at all. That they create their own news by saying, for example, oh, experts are saying, or blah, blah, the talk is their commentaries with a show who say that in the previous show, nobody else is saying it, but now it becomes a reality, which is not just the opinion of ultra conservative person, right? We have the same on the left, of course. To be honest, this may shock you, but I stopped listening to democracy now, because I felt like I have a distinct political ideology being fed out all the time, and I find it insulting, right? But at least there's matter about what they're doing. It's not that easy. When I watch Fox, I really feel like my intellect's being insulted. Actually, my 12-year-old feel insulted by the news and the lies that he can distinguish when he watches them. But I would say the written press in their media, well, not the written press, but traditional press, newspaper that now are on media formats, that's what I trust the most.
Sandra, who do you watch? You'll be next.
I would say that
you're next, and then you. Okay.
I would recommend looking at everything from democracy now to Fox and everything in between, because that's the only way you would get to a better idea and have your own conclusions. All the media, even from the left and to the right, I mean, they have their own biases and they have their own agendas. So, and I would not particularly single out CNN, because CNN has done a lot of things that I don't like. However, CNN en Español has been working during the particular crisis in Puerto Rico. They have been very good, and they even open an office, a local office, and they have a stringer, a reporter in Puerto Rico, Rafi, a very good friend of mine, which they never had before, and I appreciate that. Also, I will go to Europe. The Guardian has done a lot of good reporting on Puerto Rico, even better than the New York Times and the Washington Post.
Exactly.
The Guardian for me, that would be
Thank
an idea.
For any news media, and this is a key lesson in news literacy. When you read any story, check if the data that are presented are being verified. V for verification. I for independence. If it's an independent voice or if it's someone that is connected to something else. if it's stated as such, because sometimes you don't know if the voice is independent or not. And if the news media have accountability for what they state. If it's, we interviewed X number of people, not just unknown sources, unnamed sources all the time. So this is part of the VIA of news literacy. My favorite for knowing, documented. She's long-winded. She repeats herself. You already know who I'm talking about.
Oh,
Rachel Maddow. But in terms, look at these expressions, but in terms of documentation of the facts, repeated and hyperbole, as sometimes she goes there, but in terms of hyperbole, but in terms of documentation, she documents her statements.
Yes.
So the other part is, it's like
much more than you even want.
And so if I'm gonna have one more source, it's National Public Radio.
Oh,
yeah, definitely.
How can we forget National Public Radio?
NPR did a very good series on Puerto Rico.
Yes, okay, so.
Is it my turn or?
No, I think
somebody else.
you're then you. Go ahead.
I'm first generation, American, but I've always had family in Medina. I've always had a family because I'm Filipino. I visit my grandparents going back. I still visit Puerto Rico. All my aunts, uncles, and cousins were over there. So there was a deep anguish in the diaspora community here, not being able to connect, especially when I speak. So getting that first phone call was critical. You know, que están vivos. I have uncles that are under dialysis and chemotherapy that I didn't know if they were alive or not.
Yeah, no, we feel the same.
So my thing is, a month after the news, it's getting that first phone call and shipping the family like a little AM FM portable radio because they didn't have the news themselves. They were relying on us to give them the news. And what we were hearing was, you know, the death toll was 5 or 6. It wasn't as catastrophic. And then a month later, you know, my family was telling me, no, it's not true. It's all on the report. You don't know how many people died on the hospital care, suicide rate. So people that didn't leave their homes and they drowned when they were dead. And oh my God, it's emotional. Sorry.
Yeah, come back.
But
we feel the pain. We're on the same boat.
so, you know, then I read a Washington Post article months later how, you know, the death toll was only reported and it was in the 1,000 range when you include all these other incidents.
Yep.
And part of me was wondering, was it because of the internal collapse of the telecommunication in La Isla? Was it because the government didn't want people to know because they were doing such a shitty job of getting emergency help out there? Like I was just grateful that my family, you know, didn't get the brunt of it because they're on the west side of the island, the northwest side of the island. And heard from my family and friends that, you know, were on the eastern side of the island. Was there ever a final or continuing tally of the death toll? And I know that your main concern in your article when you started speaking was how do we set up an emergency telecommunication crisis intervention center that this never happens again, you know, especially for people in La Isla. And how do you even start that?
I heard you and I started crying because for almost 4 months I heard, I don't know how many stories of people calling desperate, and I was the only one at the station listening to them, and they would come. There was a lady, and that was broadcasted on the report by National Public Radio. There was a reporter in Puerto Rico doing a story, and she went to the station, and this lady came and had bruises, and her eye was black, and she was being a victim of domestic violence, and she was escaping from her abuser and went to un refugio, a shelter, and couldn't get in. So she went to the station, and it was completely dark outside. It was about almost 10 p.m. And I went crazy trying to reach out on an ambulance. There was no way of communicating with them. And you know what I did, what I had to do? And I put Alana, the reporter, on the air, and she wasn't prepared. She said it on the report. I felt embarrassed about that. And I left her, I said, talk to the people on the radio. So I went and dealt with the woman. And the way I did it was tweeting, because Twitter was working at that time at the station. So I tweeted the mayor of San Juan saying that she was here in the States and criticizing Trump and doing all the media in the States, but not helping the people in San Juan at that moment. And I tweeted her and I criticized her and the governor as well. And I linked on the tweet David McNaught and all the reporters that were from the States. And in 4 minutes, I had a response team at the station who took over the case and were able to save this lady. So that happened live, and the reporter from National Public Radio was there seeing that. And during the coverage, it was so hard because, as I said, I got about 8 cases of people who called saying that they were going to commit suicide because they were going crazy. And imagine us working out of the darkness with a curfew outside and with nowhere to go and telling them not to kill themselves. Also, a couple of days before, at the beginning, there was ¿cómo se dice? Una inundación en Toa Baja, a flood in Toa Baja. And people kept calling, and you hear that. I was listening in the recording when I was writing my book, and that I hope it comes out.
That's another book.
That's another book.
It's about the experience.
It's called El Diario del Huracán.
Yeah.
And I was listening to that, and people were calling every single hour saying, I have water, de un pie de alto, about 2 feet of water, 3 feet of water. My house is, completely underwater, and the government would not respond, and we will go crazy. 10 people died that we know of, and the mayor came to the station the next day, bursting out in tears because he knew people were dying. So imagine us as a reporter.
The mayor of Toa Baja.
So that's why my emphasis in saying that the diaspora must create.
Go to the next session, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is an opportunity for the diaspora to create links in communications within the island for this, because we will not, let me say this in Spanish, we cannot allow this to happen again, ever. The lack of communications was really bad.
I'm gonna take your question and your question together to see if we can answer it. We may have to continue.
Well,
answering
mine's
outside.
actually a comment, and it's hard to follow on that one, on those, but I think it's really important. I have lived and reported news from various countries, and what I've come to understand is that all information is selective and all media is biased. It's like the 3 blind men and the elephant. Everybody knows that one?
Mm-hmm.
Media is a product of class, culture, history. And it's so important to remember that and not to be self-righteous about it. Because, for instance, I consider NPR highbrow gossip. And I have been in a situation in Cuba, which people think of as having no news, but when I worked at Radio Havana, we would report stories diametrically opposed to what you all were reading and hearing in the United States. I don't know about Puerto Rico. And our sources were Reuters, AP, UPI, and France Press. Same sources, different reports. Reporting on the Vietnam War from the Vietnamese perspective, completely different. The tone is different, the assumptions are different. So to say that media can be unbiased is a fiction that we tell ourselves. And I would say that the important thing to keep in mind when you're reading anything, looking at anything, seeing anything, is to remember that the bottom line is ethics and morals. And to remember that history is always told from the perspective of the victor.
I think we'll have time for one more.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'd like to be as optimistic as Harry is about the transfer of population. Harry believes that Puerto Rico will continue to be Puerto Rican. But I've seen, I lived most of my year in Puerto Rico, and I've seen, for example, the massive exodus But at the same time, if you spend time in Isla Verde, you see the massive entrance of Americans who are buying up all the apartments in Isla Verde,
Calle
dirt-
Luisa,
dirt
the
cheap.
side that, on the other side of.
Prado,
That's all
Prado.
American.
I live in a building with 200 apartments. That building has changed dramatically. So we're seeing, now there are other concrete evidence. The massive transfer of inmates
Oh, yeah.
into American prisons
No, no.
so that they don't come back. These are mostly men,
Ain't nobody's talking about that.
young men,
Yeah.
who are incarcerated for all kinds of reasons. Many of them have never been to trial, right? There was the restructuring of the school system to make it palatable to the Americans, so that it resembles the Americans. The implementation of massive numbers of charter schools and bilingual schools. So you do see the fact that the PNP is in power and they feel that they cannot win, since they only control between 23 and 43% of the electorate. How do we become majority? How do we become, so that we can achieve our goal and the final annexation, the death to Puerto Rico, by making it the 51st state? Let's make the population change. Under Luis Muñoz Marín, there was a strategy to push Puerto Ricans out. This process underway is a little bit more sophisticated. It's not only pushing Puerto Ricans out, it's bringing Americans in.
Yeah, well, I have to tell you that the numbers of Americans from the mainland are moving to Puerto Rico. There are not enough, and there will never be enough to replace the Puerto Rican population. You should not worry about the transfer of population. You should worry about the denationalization of the Puerto Rican economy, which actually has been happening since the 1960s. That is what should trouble you. It's not who lived there, who controls the economy. We don't control the economy anymore. It has been over 70% of the Puerto Rican economy has been denationalized since the 1955, 1958 to the present. That's what should worry you, not thousands or tens of thousands of people from the mainland moving to Puerto Rico. That's not going to change Puerto Rico at all. That's not going to change it. And actually, a good measure of that, look around, go to any other barrios. We have been here forever. We're still Puerto Ricans. A few Americans are not going to make us not Puerto Ricans.
But what will change is, you hit it right on the nail to say that what has changed, and here's your connection to the media, is the franquicización de Puerto Rico, del negocio de Puerto Rico, which radio stations used to be 90+% Puerto Ricanos, the ownership. Now it's no longer that trend. Television is no longer Puerto Rican in terms of ownership. We don't know the assessment of the content, how it's changed from Mexico, la unificación de Puerto Rico con Univision. It didn't work for them. They're shifting, but there's a lot of things that are changing, and the selling of WIPR, where now you have to listen to English programming instead of español, that's a problem.
Or religious content.
Or religious content, even on WIPR. Folks, our time is up. You're welcome to stay talking to the panelists. Thank you so much.